Hello everybody, Sparkster1701 here. It's time for another quick Siege review. We're looking at the second of the deluxe weaponizers released. This is Sixgun. And as you can clearly tell, there is a marketable difference between the Generation 1 version over here and the new Siege version. The G1 version was included as a bonus figure with Metroplex, and thus was built out of many of his pieces. Predominantly about 5 of his guns, one of them of course being a double-barreled, hence the name Sixgun, and 2 pieces of his tower, one of his towers in city mode. So that more or less meant you could really only play with Sixgun when Metroplex was in robot mode, and deciding to grapple his enemies instead of shoot them. Whereas this new SIEGE Sixgun is a totally independent figure, and even more so has an alternate mode that the original toy does not have. Of course, given the nature of how the original Sixgun is comprised, since as you can see he is all built out of pieces, so he is just assembled. So the only articulation he has is at the shoulder. You can bring the shoulder, rotate the shoulders all the way around so you can aim the guns that form his arms any which way you like, and that's it. Whereas the articulation on this new one is pretty intense in comparison. We can turn the head from side to side. Doesn't rock up and down, it's not on a ball joint. It does have articulation at the shoulder, so he can rotate his shoulder all the way around. He does also have articulation here at the elbow, so you can bend his arm about 90 degrees. And he does have a swivel here at the bicep, so you can swivel his arm around from side to side. And of course he can detach his guns everywhere. As the one just fell on the floor. And then Sixgun falls down himself. Very helpful, is he? Does have a joint here at his hips, so you can twist him at the hip. You can spread his legs out all the way, so he can do a full splits. You can raise his legs up at the hip, like so. He can bend at the knee like so. And he can even bend his ankles. So quite a lot of posability is available to you from the new Sixgun. Quite a considerable improvement over his G1 counterpart. But as I also said earlier, he has an alternate mode as well. Let's take a look at that now. Now here's what Sixgun looks like in his alternate mode. He's apparently some sort of VTOL type airplane. Which does look pretty good. It's not the best, I'll give it that, but it does work out pretty well. Give you a nice overhead view of it. Yeah, the robot arms do still stand out, and of course the back of it is just the legs folded up, but it does serve the purpose, and it does give Sixgun a reasonable alternate mode. Something that was lacking in the original, but when we bring the original out here a little bit, this area right in here, paint it silver, paint some of it silver, and it would look passable for the cockpit section that's on the new one. And of course, The circular sections here are easily doable to look like the VTOL areas here on the new toy, so it isn't too much of a stretch of the imagination to believe that this could have come from this. May take a little bit more imagination, but I think it works out. It gives a new dimension to look at for Sixgun, especially since he was more or less just a relatively forgotten character, only recently being brought into memory thanks to the Metroplex expansion for the Transformers card game. As when you buy Metroplex, you will get Sixgun here as one of the pieces. But unfortunately, you don't get this Sixgun. You get one that basically becomes a tower for Metroplex. So it retains the G1 origins. But we do know COG is coming in the new card game, new expansion for the card game here at the end of the month. So maybe we'll get lucky and get Sixgun as well. Alright, now like with COG that I showed you earlier in the month, Sixgun here can be broken down into some weapon emplacements to be mounted onto other Transformers. First we're going to break him down into the different weapons that he becomes to show that off to everybody. And then we'll form his weapon systems, and once again our model of choice will be Sideswipe. Some of the pictures on Sixgun's box do show him as being a weapon system for Ironhide, but not all the weapons systems that Sixgun makes can be fitted on Ironhide, but all of them, as shown in the instructions, can be put on Sideswipe. So we'll just use Sideswipe as our model. Now here is Sixgun broken into his different weapons. It becomes four different weapons and one bonus system. This will be the bonus system here. It's described in the instructions as an MTX-50 dual flank boost launcher. So this is probably intended to be mounted on their backs like a jetpack. Especially since we got a couple of exhaust nozzles here. So this could be mounted as a jetpack. And we got the one single weapon, which the instructions call a MTX S2A guided missile launcher. And of course we got his legs, which are listed as MTX M2 anti-gravity cannons. So since you got two legs, you get two of those. Sixgun's arms form what are described as MTX LR ion pulse blasters. Pretty neat. And lastly, these two tiny little guns are W5 gyro blasters. So you could really equip a small group of Transformers with all of Sixgun's components. But as we said earlier, like COG, these can be combined to form special layouts for a large Transformer. So let's put these together and mount them onto Sideswipe. Now this unit here is the defensive loadout. And as you can see, it more or less makes it a rather extremely souped up jetpack of sorts, as it pretty much mounts just about all of the weapons onto Sideswipe's back. The jetpack mounts onto his backside, and then you attach the anti-gravity cannons on the sides, and then basically mount the ion cannons to the missile launcher and then connect that to the jetpack. It leaves out the gyro blasters, but I figured Sideswipe could mount them on his wrists, or he could hold them in his hands, but if he's got them on his wrists, then that leaves his hands free, and he can presumably, if he'll cooperate with me, he can carry his gun, and then that leaves the other hand free for another weapon. The instructions have a little bit of an error on this because they seem to include an extra set of the gravity cannons here on the side and mount them to Sideswipe's feet. All in all, this isn't a bad mode, but as you do see, I do have Sideswipe slightly pitched forward, because if he stands straight up, this thing's a little bit back-heavy. So that's the one thing you'll have to be careful of if you're going to display this. It does tend to get a little top-heavy. But all in all, it is rather impressive, but you do wonder just how exactly the two little boosters down here are going to get him off the ground. Alright, let's reconfigure this for the other payload. And now here we have the offensive payload, where we've got the anti-gravity cannons mounted to Sideswipe's feet. The boost launcher becomes something of a makeshift shield of sorts and has the gyro blasters mounted at the top and bottom. The missile launcher now becomes a backpack unit and keeps the ion pulse blasters mounted just above Sideswipe's head. And of course, that leaves his hands free for other weapons. As you can see, in his left hand, I've put his rifle back in. All in all, this mode isn't too bad. Looks kind of wicked, but I'd be worried about having guns that close to my own head. If those things have an explosive backblast, it probably would take his head with it. And we won't even get started about the fact that he's standing on a pair of guns, but it still looks kind of neat. This mode isn't as wobblesome to worry about as the defensive loadout, but the connection points from the launchers down, the anti-gravity cannons here, isn't always the best, so you'll have to make sure they're in real snug in his feet so they don't fall out. Other than that, this isn't too bad of a mode. It's different, to say the least. Now, of course, this is all like COG, a defense and offensive loadout, but Sixgun has one more, surprisingly. He has one extra weapon. Let's get it configured and show that off to you. Alright, for this last configuration, it just uses the boost launcher and the missile launcher units, and you combine them together to form a high-precision launcher gauntlet. So basically, you give him a specialized giant hand cannon of sorts. So he can pretty much fire off rockets from his fingers of an oversized hand similar to the Dragon Zord back from the old Power Rangers series. Or, of course, for those of you who would love to take advantage of the extra articulation that these toys possess, we'll go in for a Street Fighter crossover and do ourselves a Dragon Punch. Shoryuken! Okay, that's enough being silly here. All in all, that looks like a rather clunky weapon. It does tend to make him weigh a little more to the one side. Since, as you can see, he is leaning a little bit to the right. But all kidding aside, this isn't too bad. It adds a nice extra dimension for Sixgun on this, and I think I can enjoy that. It's at least a different option, and that I'm always willing to be down for. Even if it does look rather silly. All in all, I do like what they did with Sixgun here. It's a nice way to bring him back into the mainstream fold of the Transformer toys, and we don't have to spend a ton of money buying a large playset robot just to get him as a bonus figure. So I do like the improvements. Now, since the original toy was repainted for a Decepticon toy back in 1992, I'd be interested in seeing what the Decepticon equivalent of Sixgun would look like, and seeing this one done up and re-released that way. I know that screams Hasbro cheapness, but I think that'd be a nice way to bring in a toy to most worldwide audiences that never got to see Metro Titan, and still bring him in as a relatively wicked-looking way to bring another figure back into the mainstream again. But all in all, this is a nice improvement to Sixgun, and certainly has considerably more play value than the original one did. So definitely, good job, Hasbro, on improving this toy. Well, that concludes my comparison of Sixgun. I hope you all enjoyed it. If you liked this video, please drop me a thumbs up here on YouTube. If you're new to my channel, please hit the subscribe button down below and join up in our ranks. Make sure to also ring the bell so you'll be notified when I post future content. And also, please share your thoughts about either version of Sixgun in the comments down below. This is Sparkster1701 saying I will catch you all later.